Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the January 2022 meeting of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. My name is Alan Bowser. I'm president of the Civic Fed. Happy New Year to everybody. We have an exciting program tonight. We've got two great guests. Before we start, we've got some association business to take care of after some introduction. So we're going to go around the horn, ask people to identify themselves and say where they live and if they belong to a civic association, starting with Carol Ann Barth.
Hi, Carol Ann, and I live in Northwood Four Corners, where we have a lovely active civic association, and I'm a past president of the Federation.
Jim Zepp. Still muted.
Unmute yourself, baby.
He's going to get some technical assistance, I can see.
There we go. I've unmuted.
Who are you and where do you live?
Okay. Jim Zepp, calling from frosty Northwood Four Corners.
And a past president of the Civic Fed. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Jim. Amy
Thank you.
Henchy.
Yeah.
Amy Henchy, I live in Northwood Side. I'm the secretary of the Northwood Side Civic Association and one of three delegates from our neighborhood to the Civic Fed. I just joined the Civic Fed family recently, and I'm looking forward to hearing what's going on in Annapolis.
Thank you, Amy. Karen.
I'm Karen Cordry. I'm president of the Kensington Heights Civic Association. We surround the Wheaton Mall on the south and west sides, and I am recording secretary for Civic Fed.
And thank you for doing that. Alan Myers.
Alan Myers, president of the Maplewood Citizens Association.
Thank you, Alan. Joan.
I'm Joan Bierweiler. I live in Aspen Hill, and I'm a member of a number of Aspen Hill organizations.
Thank you, Joan. Marc Korman.
I'm Marc Korman. I'm one of your speakers tonight, and my neighborhood is associated with the Edgemoor Citizens Association.
Thanks, Mark. Ben.
Well, good evening, folks. Ben Kramer. I too am one of your speakers. I live in the Durwood area and am past president of the Bowie Mill Civic Association.
Thank you, Senator. Barbara.
I'm Barbara Sofel. I'm a member of the Parkwood Residents Association, and I'm also co-chair of Citizens Against Beltway Expansion.
Thank you, Barbara. Jackie.
I'm Jackie Boko. I do the newsletter and the website for the Civic Federation. I'm with the Northwood Four Corners Civic Association, where I also do their newsletter and website.
Thank you. Peggy Dennis.
Caught me. You caught me. Can you hear me?
Sorry. Yes, we hear you. Sorry,
Thank
Alan,
you.
I accidentally muted you too.
I'm sorry, I was still eating dinner. Peggy Dennis, three-term past president of the Civic Federation, 15 years as newsletter editor. I'm a member of the West Montgomery County Citizens Association, but not their delegate.
Thank you, Peggy. Joshua Montgomery. Still muted, Josh.
How about now?
That's good.
All right. Once again, Joshua Montgomery, the McKinney Hills Carroll Knowles Civic Association. Also first vice president, MCCF. That's me.
Thank you so much, Jerry Garson. You have to unmute.
I'm sorry about being muted. I'm Jerry Garson, treasurer of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. I live in Regency Estates Citizens Association, Inc. And I've been involved with other stuff also.
Thank you. Dick? We can read your lips, but you need to unmute if we're going to hear you.
I'm one of those old timers. A little slow. At any rate, the name is Dick Coffinger. I'm a past president of the Civic Fed, and I've been attending meetings since 1985.
Boy, see, that wasn't so scary.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Cloverly Civic Association. Is that Remain?
My name is Clint Romine. I'm president of the Cloverly Civic Association.
We're glad to have Cloverly here. Thank you. Joan, another Joan. And so the person only identified as Joan. Go ahead there.
Okay, I'm Joan Cohen. I live in Aspen Hill. I'm associated with multiple civic associations, and I'm currently the recording secretary. I think that's what I am, of the Aspen Hill Civic Association.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Jean Kavanaugh.
Jean Kavanaugh, Seven Oaks, Evanswood Civic Association, former rep to MCCF.
Former rep. Carla. And Carla, you're muted. There you go.
I'm Carla Steinborn. I also live in Aspen Hill and also am an officer in the Aspen Hill Civic Association. And I've worked with some of the other groups that are involved in the current effort, which I won't name right now.
Thank you, Carla. Marc Woodard, introduce yourself and say where you're living now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm formerly of Woodmore. I'm in transition to Leisure World, and I'm right now in an extended stay place in Columbia, Maryland. My guest to balance.
Thanks
I'm the former chair of the Greater Silver Spring Democratic Club.
Thank you, Marc, for joining us. Robert Janku. A lot easier when you unmute, everybody.
You muted it again. Okay, Robert Janku, treasurer for North Potomac Citizens Association. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheldon.
My name is Sheldon Fishman. I live in the Forest Estates Community Association, right by Holy Cross Hospital.
Thank you, Sheldon. Bob Oshel.
I'm Bob Oshel, Vice President of the Woodside Park Civic Association.
Great to see you, Bob. Rosemary.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Arkoyan. I live in Goshen. I'm associated with the Goshen Historical Preservation Society.
Thanks for joining us, Rosemary. Linda.
I'm Linda Nicastro Pastel. I live in Aspen Hill. I'm a member of the Aspen Hill Civic Association and Homeowners Association, and I'm an activist.
Thank you very much. Aspen Hill is very well represented today. Teresa.
Hi, everyone. Teresa Sparkland from the Kenwood Condominium Association. I'm the Community Affairs Liaison.
Okay, thank you. Kira.
I'm Kira Luders. I'm president of the Parkwood Residents Association, and Parkwood spans both Kensington and Bethesda. Nice to see everyone. Happy New Year.
Elizabeth Joyce. We'd love to have you unmuted, Liz.
I've just been so quiet. Yes, Liz Joyce, second vice president of the Pacific Federation from East Silver Spring.
Okay, we'll go quickly. Jeff Griffin.
I'm Jeff Griffith. I'm vice president of the Parkwood Residents Association.
Chris Reynolds.
Hey, I'm Chris Reynolds. I'm president of the Seven Oaks Evanswood Citizens Association, which is near the former Mrs. K's, now Zinnia. It's cold out here.
You're always walking at our meetings. Sharon Rose. Cynthia Green. Say hi, Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Green. I'm with the Springfield Civic Association and CCCFH.
Thank you so much for joining us. Amy Wyckoff.
Yes, thank you. I'm a member of the Parkwood Residents Association. I'm in Bethesda.
Thank you. Joe Awkward, just a couple more people. Joe. Solomon. You're muted, Sol. Still muted, Solomon.
Okay, hi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Saul Levy, and I'm the president of the Aspen Hill Civic Association, and I'm glad to be on this evening.
Thank you so much. Andy. Andy, anything?
I'm Andy Harney. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Andy Harney, and I'm the village manager of Section 3 of Chevy Chase.
We love Chevy Chase. Al Carr. We're introducing ourselves, Al.
Hey, I'm Al Carr. I'm a delegate representing the 18th District, Kensington, Chevy Chase, Wheaton, Garrett Park, Silver Spring, Rockville.
Well, thank you, everybody, for introducing yourselves. And if we've missed you, we apologize for that. We've got some association business we'd like to take care of right now. I'd like to entertain a motion to adopt the meeting agenda. It's on page 1 of the newsletter. Do I have a motion to adopt?
I make a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been first and second. All those in favor say aye.
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 The agenda is adopted. Next thing is the approval of the minutes from the December 13th, 2021 general meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? They're on page 12 of the newsletter.
Motion.
Second.
Second.
Been first and second, and all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and then one last piece, the treasurer's report. Jerry, can you give us a treasurer's report?
We operate on a fiscal year starting July 1st through January 10th, 2022. Membership dues have been that we've received are $976. We've also gotten a refund from the cancellation of our county meeting of $87, and our website expenditures are $184. And net income for the period is $425. And our current bank balance is $9,429. In the last 30 days, we've received $35 of membership dues. If there are any questions, contact me.
Thank you. This is an appropriate time to ask everybody who has not paid their dues for this year to please pay your dues. You can pay them online at the Civic Federation website, montgomerycivic.org. Any general announcements that people would like to make for the good of the order? Anything that you'd like to share with us? Well, seeing nobody has any announcements to make, we're going to jump right into our program. Our program this evening is a conversation with 2 outstanding members of our Montgomery County delegation, Senator Ben Kramer and Delegate Marc Korman. I noted in the newsletter article that Marc is a member of the Appropriations Committee, and I think I might have made a mistake when I said that he was chair of the Transportation and Environment Committee. I'm thinking that's the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee, and I completely left out Senator Kramer's official affiliation. He's a member of the Senate Finance Committee. Both are good friends of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. Marc has been with us for this program for the last several years, and we wanted to take this opportunity to thank Senator Kramer for all the good government work that he's done for the citizens of Montgomery County over the last many years. A lot of the legislation that we've cared most about, increasing transparency and accountability of public officials, has gone through Ben Kramer's office. And because of him, we can thank him for new Inspector General powers for the Housing Opportunities Commission, WSSC, MNC, PPC, and Montgomery College. So thank you very much, Senator Kramer. I'll turn the program right over to Senator.
Point of order. I talked to you earlier today. Is there any way we can have Carr included in some of this discussion?
Well, Al is on, and I'm sure he wanted to participate, so sure.
Well, it's in reference to some state bill that is being considered dealing with park and planning.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay.
No, Al
Thank you.
Al is also a friend of the Civic Federation, of course.
Yes, he is.
Has an opportunity to speak. So thank you, Carrie, for reminding us that Delegate Carr is on the call. So let me turn the program over to Senator Kramer and to Delegate Korman to preview the 2022 legislative session in Annapolis. Gentlemen, proceed as you would like.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, Delegate Korman is welcome to kick off the show unless he would prefer that I do so. But
let's avoid a constitutional crisis. You go ahead, Mr. Senator.
All righty then, fair enough. Thank you for that. And Alan, thank you for the invitation to meet with all of you this evening. Thank you to all the good work that the Montgomery County Civic Federation has done through lots of years. I have always valued and appreciated hearing the perspective of the members of the Civic Fed, and have very much appreciated the support that the Civic Fed has provided on a number of legislative initiatives that I've introduced. So my thanks to all of you. Lots of familiar faces here that I've seen for a very long time. And although we're not in person, it's wonderful to see you via the virtual, I think, world that we've become very accustomed to and very sadly are still engaged in, and which is really my first comments are about how we will be meeting in Annapolis. For those of you who don't know, the legislature goes into session this coming Wednesday for the next 90 days after that. And we had been hoping to be able to meet in person with the folks, the residents of the state, with our constituents, with activists and people who are interested in sharing their sentiment with regard to issues that are of concern to them. And unfortunately, with the latest surge in COVID, and I'll speak to the Senate side, the House had already established what their protocols would be. The Senate changed their protocols from being in person this past week. We got notice that we will be virtual for our bill hearings in committees through, I believe it's February 14th. And then the plan is to go back to in-person committee hearings. And the thought process being that this wave of the most recent surge will have subsided, and that being able to have live bill hearings will be possible. The Senate will conduct its business in person on the Senate floor chamber, and there will be very limited opportunities for members of the public to access individual legislators' offices in the Senate. But it'll be highly restricted. Each individual member can establish their own COVID standards. The chair of one of our committees today at a meeting announced that anyone who wants to enter their suite of offices will be required to be fully vaccinated. So it'll make for, once again, another interesting session, not ideal, but we'll try to make the very best of a bad situation yet again. And as we all deal with the crisis, and that'll be a big part of the legislative work we do again in Annapolis this year, is trying to provide resources, assistance, and aid to all of our residents in apartment dwellings, our residents with mortgages that they're having difficulty making those payments, for our small business owners and operators, many of whom are still in fact struggling with the virus. And a big part of what my office, and I can assure you Delegate Korman's office and all of the legislators this past year, has been trying to get the unemployment benefits that so many of our constituents have needed to them. I am going to be critical of the governor's office on this issue. From the inception of the pandemic, when business was first shut down in March and April of 2020, people found themselves out of work. And the unemployment division was quickly overwhelmed. And the governor's office just kept denying that there was a problem. I have had literally hundreds and hundreds of people who live in my district contact me, telling me they can't access their unemployment benefits. The computer system has been a complete and total failure. And there has just been a steadfast refusal from the administration to recognize and accept that this has been a huge problem and to focus time, effort, and energy on getting it resolved. So here we are almost 2 years into the pandemic, and I still on a daily basis am receiving contacts from constituents who are saying, I have been trying for weeks, and they certainly can't get through to anyone on the phone. And when the computers that have very rigid protocols for how information is entered, and it's very specific, it doesn't necessarily apply to every individual circumstance and situation. So they can't utilize the computer, yet they can't speak to anyone. So all of our offices have been working overtime, making constant contact with the Department of Labor and the Unemployment Division, trying to get these resources to our constituents. And I suspect we'll be continuing to deal with this for some time going forward. One of the blessings of our federal government that's in place at the moment is that they stepped up to the plate to respond to the pandemic and have ensured that the states have resources for all of our constituents. And I am not going to go any deeper on that as a budget issue, because that is Delegate Korman's wheelhouse. And I will let him discuss this embarrassment of riches that will be very short-lived, but we're blessed to have it just the same. And I think one of the first things we'll be discussing when we go back to Annapolis is going to be redistricting. And that happens every 10 years after the census. The legislature met earlier this month. And by the way, Alan, if I am going on too long at any point, please don't hesitate and say, Ben, thanks, we've heard enough from you.
Not a problem, Senator.
Okay, I'm just saying. So redistricting, we worked on congressional redistricting during a special session the first week of December. It'll be legislative redistricting we'll be taking up early on when we get back to Annapolis. Montgomery County is not going to be overly impacted with redistricting. I think the most notable change will be that our friend Katie Fry Hester, the senator who has part of Howard County and part of Carroll County, will be picking up part of Montgomery County at the northern end of the district along the Howard County line, moving towards Damascus up at the north. And that's because of Montgomery County population growth. So we currently have 8 senators that represent Montgomery County, and now we will have a portion of an additional senator because of the growth in Montgomery County. And again, that'll be Senator Katie Fry Hester, who will actually be a participant in the Montgomery County delegation activities. But once again, there will not be a tremendous amount of impact or change within Montgomery County as a consequence of redistricting. One of the, I think, priority issues of this session is going to be legalization of cannabis. And it's an exceedingly complex issue. There's a slight, I think, difference in the mindset as to how we go about it between the House and the Senate. The House is looking to put it on the ballot for the residents of the state to, cast a vote as to whether they want to legalize cannabis. And I think the Senate is in agreement with that. I think the difference is that the Senate has been looking at putting into place all the various components of how it will be implemented if approved. And the House does not seem to be ready. And I think they're looking at it a little bit further down the road. If it is passed here, then the focus will be on the implementation. So there's a little difference there between the House and the Senate on the matter. I am one of a very small group in the Senate that has been appointed to a work group in the Senate to try to work through the myriad of issues with regard to cannabis. And it's everything from ensuring that there is economic equity in how the licenses are distributed, to how it will be taxed, and whether the local jurisdictions will have an opportunity to tax it, whether it will be a retail sale at the private sector exclusively, or if county governments will be given the opportunity to have oversight of the retail sales to ensure that there's the greatest opportunity to protect the public is part of that discussion. And there are equity issues with regard to what do we do with folks who currently have a record that was related to use of cannabis, and will those records be expunged? How do we deal with that? How do we deal with employment and the use of cannabis? I'm also very concerned about public welfare issues surrounding the use of cannabis, and especially for our multi-unit dwellings. I've done a lot of work on the subject of secondhand tobacco smoke in multi-unit dwellings. And as a consequence of the work I've done in that arena, I hear from apartment dwellers, townhouse residents, condominium residents constantly about how they are adversely impacted by secondhand tobacco smoke. I can assure you that if we legalize cannabis, we're going to be experiencing the exact same issue from residents in multi-unit dwellings. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but I'm hoping we can figure it out and make it part of the work that comes out of the legislature if we do get a bill passed on it. One of the things that we do a lot of work in my committee relates to the climate crisis and how we are responding to it. Senator Paul Pinsky has a bill that he has been working on for a couple of years, the Climate Solutions Now Act, which addresses many areas of the climate crisis and a response to it. It did not pass last year. Again, there was a difference between the House and the Senate with regard to the legislation that did not get reconciled by the end of the session. So that legislation will be back again this year. And I spoke with Senator Pinsky today, and he sounded very hopeful that the differences have been resolved and that the legislation will be moving forward this session. I have a number of initiatives that I'm personally working on in this arena, including a bill that for the first time would hold the fossil fuel industry accountable for their pollution and require them to finally pay for the costs of their pollution, something that all of us have been doing for the last century. We pay for it through all of the adverse impacts that are happening to our climate right now, to the adverse health impacts of fossil fuel pollution. And but the folks who have been creating it have not paid the cost of doing so. So the legislation that I'm introducing would require that the polluters pay a fee for their pollution, and none of it will be a state grab. The revenues that would come in, and they are significant, would be sent back to the residents in the form of rebates, particularly to our most economically disadvantaged residents in the state, in the way of a routine check to help them offset the impacts of the climate crisis. And we know that our economically disadvantaged residents face the greatest harm from the climate crisis. In addition to those resources going back to our residents in the form of a rebate check, there would also be money to build out our infrastructure to address the climate crisis. And that would be resources to go to local jurisdictions dedicated to renewable energy and work to ensure that we reduce our energy demand. And that with the majority or 50% of those resources, not the majority, 50%, again, going to economically disadvantaged communities and 50% going to jurisdictions, again, to focus on projects accelerating the use of renewable energy and energy efficiency, and as well as dealing with the changes that are already impacting us. So, you know, for instance, where we are already experiencing flooding, how do we mitigate those impacts? And this legislation would create resources for that. Also, real fast, I'll be introducing legislation on the same subject with regard to high polluting vehicles. It would create a fee for the first time on very high polluting vehicles. The monies that would come from those fees would go right back into rebates to encourage people to be purchasing electric vehicles and to expand electric vehicle recharging stations. All of us, or the vast majority of us, are required to visit the vehicle emission stations regularly and pay a fee, $14 for the courtesy of that. But there are a lot of vehicles that they're exempt, they're not required to go through the process. So Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo and I are introducing a bill that at a minimum would require these vehicles that are exempt to pay the same $14 fee that the rest of us pay. And the resources, again, from that go directly to electric vehicle rebates and building out our electric vehicle charging stations. With that, there are two local bills. One addresses a real problem with speed on the intercounty connector, significant speeding on the ICC. There are lots of communities that are adversely impacted by the speeding on the intercounty connector. There's been a lot of motorcycle racing on the intercounty connector. So the legislation that I have introduced and my colleagues in the Montgomery County delegation that I'm working with on this would require the installation of speed cameras along the intercounty connector. I have been working very closely with the Maryland Department of Transportation, trying to get them to actively enforce the speed limits. They have indicated that it's a real problem for them to have the resources and the personnel to do this on a regular basis. I was speaking actually yesterday, right before the football games, with our new Secretary of Department of Transportation, Jim Ports, and he's all in with this bill. He's actually leaving his position as the administrator with the Maryland Transportation Authority to take over as the Secretary of Transportation. And he said, you know, look, Ben, I get it. I know we've got a problem there, and this is a good way to address it. And then the last thing I'll say, I'm working with all of my friends there at the Civic Federation, and in particular, my good friends, Carol Ann Barth and Jim Zepp, on a bill that would require that certain applications for development with the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission be signed under penalty of perjury. There are a myriad of documents in Montgomery County permitting services, as well as at Park and Planning, where this is routine practice. And I found it fascinating that our county council and Park and Planning came out in opposition to this bill that would simply say, to the best of your belief and knowledge, what you're stating is in fact the truth. Yet our county council took a position against that. Park and Planning took a position against that. And I even commented, I believe, at the bill hearing that it wasn't passing the smell test. And it occurred to me that it's an election year and developer money just might be influencing outcomes at the moment. And I'm just very surprised that there would be opposition to a bill that simply says, hey, I'm telling the truth when I represent the following in my desire to get a permit And that's all it does. So I'm hoping it'll get across the finish line. I'm hoping that the Civic Federation will put its full weight and force and influence behind the bill and see if we can't get it passed. And with that, thank you all. I know I went a very long time, and Delegate Korman has been very patient, waiting for me to wrap up. So with that, thank you all.
Delegate Korman.
Thank you, Alan. It's good to be with you all again. I will try to be brief to give the people what they want and cede some time to Delegate Carr to talk about the issues that Carrie's concerned about. I think I'm here because I chair the 24-member Montgomery County House delegation. Senator Kramer chairs the 8-member, soon to be 9 members, he said, the largest delegation in the state. We beat out Prince George's by 1 member, and that's soon to grow, again, as Senator Kramer explained, as we pick up a partial district shared with Howard County. For a lot of you, you'll recognize that that's not new historically, actually. In the 90s, Montgomery and Howard shared a district. A delegate named Bob Flanagan, who went on to be Bob Ehrlich's Secretary of Transportation and then actually returned to the House of Delegates after that, represented Montgomery and Howard County at that time. So this is a function of our growth and a positive sign for us, frankly, because it's all additive. These are additional members who will help represent Montgomery County's interests in the House and the Senate. I'll talk a little bit about the protocols since Senator Kramer explained how the Senate's going to be operating. He touched a little bit on the House as well, but something we began doing in the House last session are these pro forma sessions. And that is essentially during our first few weeks of meeting. Because at that time, normally when we don't have COVID, that's a time when we basically make announcements on the House floor and honor sports teams and chess clubs and other things. We're sort of dispensing with that during COVID. And we'll simply have the majority and the minority leader on the floor to gavel things in with the speaker and do the sort of routine business that has to be done every day, which is really reading bills across the desk and assigning them to the appropriate committees and making any committee appointments and things like that, where we will be able to do our committees virtually. And it'll probably be that way until at least late January, maybe early February. And of course, a big advantage of that is based on the experience in other countries, we're hoping that we'll be past the major Omicron wave by the time we get to the end of January. I'll say there's a lot of downsides to meeting virtually. There's a lot of negative to it. There's also some silver linings. It is a lot easier to track what we're doing in the legislature now and participate than it was pre-COVID. And I'll say, I've done this meeting, I think, for 4 or 5 years with you all, which I always appreciate the invitation. We've never gotten 40 people in person to the meeting. That's probably that reflects more on me than maybe on meeting in person, but it's a lot easier for people at times to hop on to Zoom. One of the downsides, of course, is my son is here to whisper sweet nothings
And
into
it's
my ear.
glitches, by the way. That's a big downside.
Yeah. Occasionally we get some Zoom glitches, but Annapolis is not that far away, but it feels far away to people in our area who are so focused on Washington, D.C. and the federal government. So a good part about this is all of our floor sessions are now streamed. All of our committee meetings are streamed. All of our committee voting sessions are streamed. Although our committee bill hearings were always streamed, that was not the case for these other items historically. So this is a big advantage that's come about with COVID. And of course, you can testify from the comfort of your home, at least on the House side. You don't have to drive to Annapolis, get there at 1 and possibly wait there till 10 or 11 o'clock at night for your bill to be called for your 1 or 2 minutes of testimony. There's negatives also. I know the sign-up system for testifying is not as good as it could be, and we lose a lot of opportunities for some of that informal communication that you can get when you see someone in the hallway that you can't get when you're seeing someone over Zoom. But there are some silver linings. I'll briefly talk about the budget just because Senator Kramer teed me up so nicely. We are in a very unusual situation, at least for my now 8 years there. We've never really even had a 1-year budget surplus, to say nothing of a multi-year budget surplus. Now, this is a little bit different than when we talk about surpluses and deficits at the federal level, because every year we balance our budget, right? Unlike the federal government. So we never have a year where for that year, the budget is out of balance. A lot of times that's involved some really tough decisions and some difficult votes for cuts or for tax increases or other changes. But in future years, we usually project budget deficits, and that is not the case this year. For the next at least 5 or 6 years, things look pretty positive. A lot of that, as Senator Kramer explained, is due to the sort of sugar rush of the federal government, both direct support for governments, but also all that indirect support, which is really direct support for people. Enhanced unemployment benefits, although they were way too difficult to get, as Senator Kramer explained, the child tax credits, the other additional benefits that the federal government provided in multiple waves of COVID relief really helped the economy continue to function in a more normal way than people originally feared when this began. Now, obviously, if you work in the service sector, you really face some real economic difficulties, to say nothing of the public health crisis. But overall, in the aggregate, we sort of got through this a little bit better, or getting through this a little bit better than I think people originally thought 2 years ago, though obviously there's still quite a ways to go. But that does put us in a position where we have more cash than we would have expected at this time. And I think the House and the Senate position is that the uses for that money should recognize the fact that it may be short-lived, that this is not some radical change in our economy that means we're going to have positive revenue as far as the eye can see for all time, which means we're looking at more of short 1 or 2 time uses, including things like putting some money back into our rainy day fund, paying off some unfunded liabilities, like some various accounts we've used resources from over the years, 1 or 2 year construction costs, things like that, that don't create ongoing operating expenses, but are also necessary, and we have a nice opportunity to deal with those here. We'll also continuing to do the things we need to do on relief around COVID, and making sure that all our state, our local, county and municipal governments have what they need for the public health response that's obviously going to be continuing for quite some time. So with that, I'd really, Alan, if it's okay with you, I'll cede to the vice chair of the county delegation, Delegate Carr, since it sounds like there was some interest in hearing from him. And look forward to everyone's questions.
Thank you, Delegate Korman. Al Carr, would you like to address the group?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Alan, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Senate Delegation Chairman. So I think the bill that Carrie was talking about is one that I've introduced that has to do with ethics for our bi-county commission. So that we have Park and Planning, WSSC, and there's a third one called Washington Suburban Transit Commission. Those are our 3 bi-county agencies, and they're already required under state law to have ethics regulations for financial disclosure, for conflict of interest, and for lobbying. But the problem is these agencies are not always implementing that standard. So I've introduced a bill that would require each of the 3 bi-county agencies to just annually certify to the State Ethics Commission that they're in compliance. So, one example is Park and Planning. Unfortunately, their lobbying regulations are not very strong. WSSC's lobbying regulations are very strong. So, we need to have both agencies have strong lobbying definitions, lobbying rules. They should be strong and consistent. So my bill will help make that happen automatically. And by the same token, WSSC had some weaknesses in its financial disclosure form that all of its officers and employees fill out annually. So it's not just Park and Planning, it's also other agencies that sometimes fall short. So my bill, it's PGMC 103-22, which hopefully it's pretty much a no-brainer as it goes through our delegation. Just a common sense measure to have these agencies do what they're already required to do.
It looks like Carrie Lamari on this issue before we open up to general questions for our guests.
Okay, I agree with Al. I think that he's on the right track. Having said that it doesn't end there. I mean, for the past year, actually 3 years, we've been dealing with Thrive and the Attainable Housing Initiative. And while we've been dealing with the pandemic, right, our chairman and commissioners and staff members have been in social media rooms discussing strategy, et cetera. That the ethics of that is questionable, especially when we're dealing with a comprehensive process. I understand from talking to the State Ethics Commission that there just aren't any regulations with respect to that kind of social media behavior, because it all comes down from the Regional District Act, apparently, and we haven't done anything with that for many, many, many years. One more point I'd like to point out. So it's three. It's the lobbyists, it's social media activity, and the third is, let's see if I get this straight. My head's spinning at the moment. It's dealing with the zoning text amendments. I believe, and that's just me now, I'd like to get the delegation to speak up of the Federation, that when we deal with zoning text amendments, if we want to check and balance, right, the Regional District Act should create another body that reviews and authorizes the language within these zoning text amendments. I'm not trying to suggest we should take land use authority away from the county council or the planning board, but I do believe there should be an independent body somewhere in between that addresses zoning text amendments. Now, I know our friends in Friendship Heights had a petition. I think they've got several thousand signatures on it that suggests such a group, but they directed it to the county council. It should be directed to the General Assembly, because you all gave us the land use authority, so you are the one empowered to control it. I just think after all these years, we need to come back and look at the Regional District Act and how we're doing certain things with respect to land use. And thank you, Al. Thank you, Ben Kramer. Thank you, Marc Korman.
Thank you, Carrie Lamari. Carol Ann Barth, before we ask our guests to, respond generally to the issue of the Regional District Act and whether or not that's on anybody's radar screen. Carol Ann?
I put it in the chat, but I also wanted to say that the penalty of perjury bill that Ben referred to is PGMC 107-22. And we are also getting opposition on that from the Building Industry Association and from our realtors group, NIOP, all of which tells me we're on the right track. This is something worth doing. And it really, it was a fascinating and kind of a fun hearing. I'd recommend you get a glass of wine and look up that recording if you can find it, that we had on this bill. And I have lots of information, and so any delegates that are interested in pursuing this, please contact me. And we really do need to push this. It sounds like something that would just be like a technical amendment, like who would care? But Ben, is this like our third try this year?
That sounds about right, Carol. I think it's this will be our third year with the bill.
It's a surprisingly heavy lift. We have to tell the truth on all kinds of things that we sign, but it just doesn't apply to the large developers for these particular documents that we're talking about. Thanks.
And if I can add to that, and Carol is exactly right, based on the opposition from the development community, I suspect that there's a reason, and I really do, question their opposition to representing the truth. And again, these are documents that most likely are completed by land use attorneys that, fill out these documents on behalf of the entity that's doing the development project. So when we heard some of the opposition that somehow some innocent lamb that doesn't know any better is going to be filling out this application for a permit for development, is just going to be mistakenly caught up in criminal proceedings because they made a mistake. Well, again, this is not Harriet or Harry homeowner doing these documents. It's developers. It's likely their engineers or their land use attorneys completing the document. And again, nobody's going to be accidentally caught up in this, in some kind of criminal prosecution. I really don't see John McCarthy going after someone because they mistakenly didn't know what the information was. The reality is this is simply a document where we're saying, hey, give it, be honest and upfront to the best of your knowledge as to what the intent and purpose is here, and nothing more than that. And again, like I said, pretty much every county permit for construction, for development, is already signed this way, which really, and unfortunately, we didn't have any council members at the hearing because I wanted to ask them then, why do we have it on all these other documents, yet you're opposing it on this document? So,
the reality is that they have something to hide, and that's the reality. That otherwise there wouldn't be a problem with this.
That's my sentiment.
And in order for anybody to be, come under issues with this, you have to prove intent, that they knew better and they lied. And frankly, that's not an easy thing to do. So again, it's like, who can be for the lies?
Let's open it up generally to some questions. I'd like to have a public discussion of the issue that Gene Kavanaugh raised in the chat for Delegate Korman and Senator Kramer, and that's about modified mufflers. That's one of the big issues that's confronting communities in the East County. And I know that the new governor of New York has recently passed legislation that would ban essentially modified mufflers and penalize the shops that put them on cars. Senator Kramer, Delegate Korman, can you talk publicly about what might be percolating in the General Assembly to sort of address that issue?
Yeah, so I think, and I just quickly glanced at the chats and I didn't pick up a lot, but I think somebody may have mentioned, I believe it's Delegate Mary Lehman is picking up on a bill that Delegate Vaughn Stewart and I introduced last year on the issue. And quite frankly, I'm not sure how well it's going to work out. Here's the problem. First of all, trying to establish, what the volume of, decibels coming from a muffler that was either factory installed or is now modified is exceedingly challenging, especially at a point in time when there's this huge movement to limit police interaction with folks in their cars, and that we want to get away from police pulling over people because a tail light is out or something along those lines. And then here we are looking at a bill that we're going to be asking law enforcement to, if a car sounds loud, pull it over and then have to try to measure the decibels and determine whether for that particular vehicle, is it within, or is it the original manufacturer's decibel level. There has been discussion about, do we just create a straight across the board decibel level and nothing can be louder than that? Again, we get into how do you measure it? What is the responsibility for law enforcement to deal with this? And also, I think it is more problematic with motorcycles than automobiles, although it's a problem with automobiles. And that is, if we don't have motorcycles going through inspection stations at the moment. So there's no, if we were trying to set it up, so for instance, if a car went through an inspection station and the exhaust system has been modified, maybe that's an opportunity to say, hey, okay, you're out of compliance. It still would be a challenge because people would have to be trained to be checking for decibel levels and determine whether, again, it's in compliance and have equipment to do that. But because so much of this is with motorcycles, there's no natural opportunity to try to determine whether they're in compliance or not. And the other piece of that is, it is very easy to swap these out on a motorcycle. If, for instance, they were to receive an inspection ticket, they could quickly go back home, swap out the original manufactured equipment for the modified equipment, go have the motorcycle re-inspected, come back home again and swap it right back out. So
Senator Kramer, you know, I don't want to hear all the excuses why nothing can be done, because I don't believe it. I want to hear what can be done. It's not, I know motorcycles are loud, but the scourge in our communities, you know, I live a block from Colesville Road. This is constant, all night long, 24 hours a day, hundreds of cars. Some sound like rockets, especially when they're going uphill, especially when they launch themselves onto the Beltway. So there are, you know, it's just got to stop. They've just taken over our roads. There's got to be a way. I see Chris Reynolds is saying state inspections for cars, but I know that people wouldn't like to get their cars inspected every year or whatever. So why not allow the police to issue tickets, equipment repair tickets, without pulling over the driver? And they can be issued the decibel readers to get the read on the car. They can sit in my driveway, they can sit on somebody's driveway on Colesville Road or University Boulevard or the ICC. You can hear these things. It's like porn. When you hear it, you know it. What can be done?
I'm not taking issue with any of that, but I am sharing with you the reality.
Well, no, I don't want to hear no. I want to hear a solution.
Look, I introduced the legislation last year. I am sharing with you how the conversation went with the committee with jurisdiction over the matter. And it's not, again, you know, so I'm just trying to share with you the realities. I am not taking issue at all with the problem, which is why I introduced the legislation last year. I also,
there must be models of solutions in other states.
Yeah, but the question is, Jean, did they accomplish anything? So we can have a feel-good bill and a feel-good law, and then how do we enforce it? So there's, you know, I'm not saying we couldn't pass something, and then 2 years from now, 3 years
It can be
from now,
everything
4
from the
years from
equipment
now.
itself.
I'm sorry.
Don't allow the equipment in the state of Maryland. Don't allow auto repair shops or car dealers to install the illegal equipment.
And
I mean, there are lots of different levels of intervention where there's a monetary penalty that will dissuade and reduce the number. Anyway, there's lots of other important things to talk about, so. we can move on.
And just real fast, again, we have the internet. So all of these components can just be ordered online, even if we prohibited it in for retail sale at brick and mortar location in Maryland. And I'm guessing the majority of it is purchased via the internet. But I'm telling you, I don't disagree with you. I hear it constantly from my home. And I've been trying to work on an answer, and I'm going to continue to try to come up with a resolution.
Thank you.
Maybe it is the absolute decibel level, and then you do noise cameras in the same way that you do speed cameras. And, it's your job to get your motorcycle down below that decibel limit. If you don't, every time you go by the thing, you're going to get hit with $100 ticket or something like that. That may at least eliminate the interaction parts and some of those things. And
Let's get a few more questions. We've got Alan Myers, Jerry Garson, Elizabeth Joyce. Alan, please.
Yes, thank you. Gentlemen, on the evening news tonight, there were a couple of bills that the governor plans to introduce regarding crime and funding the police. Some of them have been introduced previous years, failed. One of them was dealing with new funding for the police, increasing funding for the police. And the other are these crime bills that failed previously. Would either of you please comment on these bills and what's going on with them?
I can go first if you want, Senator Kramer or Delegate Carr. This has been, one of the governor's talking points for 8 years, but has really picked up the last 2 years. He calls it refund the police, one of his classic sort of poll-tested slogans. It comes in two varieties. One is using some of that budget surplus I talked about on some of the programs you just named, and the other are some legislative initiatives. On the legislative initiative side, one of the ideas is more transparency in how warrants are being processed, really focused in his case on the city of Baltimore. I know on the House side, there's a judicial transparency group that's meeting to sort of talk about that issue to see if there's any merit there. But a lot of what he's talking about, frankly, are increased penalties and mandatory minimums and other things that a majority of the General Assembly, and I think a majority of Marylanders have decided have not been really effective in limiting crime. They feel good, right? It's great to go out and say we've passed a bill that increases the penalty for this or that, but it's not necessarily going to achieve anything. In fact, one of the reporters asking the governor questions at his press conference today was talking about a police officer in Baltimore City who they were interviewing, who said we could have a police officer on every block and wouldn't be able to stop a lot of these crimes. So there's a real problem, and it's sort of deeper than what amount of dollars are you putting towards police cars and police cameras, and what amount of penalty is on a particular crime. Now, on the funding issues, the governor has a lot of control there. I mean, he introduces the budget, and the legislature can reduce budget items right now, but not increase budget items. And if we reduce from one line item, we can't just move that somewhere else without his consent. So I suspect there'll be a lot of cooperation in finding appropriate uses for some of this money for public safety purposes, including things like making sure a lot of the local jurisdictions have the money they need for certain equipment like police cameras. And that's not an issue for the Montgomery County Police Department, which already has a camera program, but a lot of the counties have not gotten as far as Montgomery, and a lot of our municipalities have not gotten as far as Montgomery in their police camera program. So I think that'll be one area of funds that there'll be some support for. So I hope that at least partially addresses the question. I don't know if Chair Kramer or Vice Chair Carr have other thoughts.
Yeah, if I can, just real fast. And again, this is called political rhetoric. The fact of the matter is our legislature did not defund anything. We have not taken any resources away from law enforcement anywhere in the state of Maryland. And as Delegate Korman just mentioned, the governor's the one who creates the budget. If in fact law enforcement has been starved for financial resources, that rests at the feet of our governor. And I will tell you right now, this discussion we're having about the inter-county connector and not having enforcement not having the personnel, which is why we're looking at utilizing the speed cameras, is directly a consequence of Governor Hogan failing to fund positions within the Maryland Transportation Authority, and they are down personnel. He has cut their budget across all agencies. So we've seen a reduction of personnel across all agencies. But that is why I was having this conversation with the folks at the Maryland Transportation Authority who were saying, we don't have those resources. We have fewer personnel than we have had previously. And that's because Governor Hogan has not budgeted for those personnel. So I will tell you right now, that is all part of the governor's marketing and nothing more. And it's very frustrating for those of us in the legislature to hear those kinds of comments when we know what's fact and what's fiction.
Thank you, Senator Kramer, and thank you, Alan Myers. Jerry Garson.
In Montgomery County, we've regularly had problems in reopening schools after snowstorms. This is because many of the streets are not cleared of snow on a timely basis. Is it possible for the Board of Education to work with Montgomery County Department of Transportation on days when schools are closed due to snowstorms? Could we have the school bus drivers operate the county snow plows and salt and sand spreaders? This would help clear the streets faster, which would permit the faster reopening of schools. During the summer, the school bus drivers could learn how to operate the snow plows. They would earn extra money for this. Currently, there are not enough snowplow operators or school bus drivers for all the routes in the county. We probably need state legislation for this to occur.
Does anybody have a comment on Jerry's proposal?
I'm not sure.
I love you. But look, at the moment, I don't know whether there's an issue with regard to equipment not being staffed. If there is, look, at the moment, there's a shortage of bus drivers, as you mentioned, which is really coming home to roost here in Montgomery County. Whether we are, experiencing a shortage of operators for snow removal equipment, that I'm not sure of. But I don't know whether there's, equipment that's sitting idle in need of drivers, or if all the equipment the county has for snow removal is in fact utilized. It's an interesting question. I don't know what the training would be or what those requirements are. I personally think that with the last 2 snowfalls we had this week, I was pretty impressed with both the state and the county in their response and the work they did. I usually get a lot of complaints from constituents following a snowfall. I did not, and I'm not that I'm looking to get any from anybody who's watching right now on this, but I did not get a single complaint about our roads, either, from somebody saying, what they call me, but it turns out it's a county road. But I didn't get any complaints with regard to either county or state road. So at least with these last 2 snowfalls that we just had, it was pretty good. But it's an interesting concept. I agree.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Senator Elizabeth Joyce.
Yes, I wanted to segue back to Delegate Carr's very important bill. And I think it spotlights some concerns that we're all thinking about, not only in Montgomery County, but throughout the entire state, which is that a number of proposals have gained traction that, from my perspective, they would not have gotten had there been adequate citizen engagement. And this has to do with land use policies and developer interests. And as someone mentioned, zoning text amendments, I think Carrie did, we have a problem in Montgomery County in particular that zoning text amendments are used to circumvent the master planning processes. And that's an ethical issue that needs to be addressed. The Park and Planning Office of General Counsel came out with a report that was highlighted today in one of the websites about recommendations on reforming of their regulations on lobbying reporting, because we know that in our county, we've had tremendous influence by specific lobbying groups that aren't even registered as lobbyists. And also, as I mentioned to Delegate Korman early in the year, we had a discussion. Recently, there was a bill passed in the state legislature to suspend a law in Prince George's County that prevented prevented council members from taking developer money. And I still don't understand completely the context for that, but I see cropping up all over the state and in our county some very serious ethical issues that Delegate Carr's bill sort of starts addressing. And I just want to encourage and thank our state legislators for anything they can do about this, because what happens at the local issue can be at some extent regulated by the state. And from my perspective, it might be very naive, but there is a really serious and growing problem of a lack of citizen input and an outrageously disproportionate developer influence on these decisions.
Thank you, Liz. I don't know if anybody has a comment on that. Since I have a couple of questions I want to ask, I direct the first one to Delegate Korman. One of the bills that caught our attention over the last couple of years was a statewide bottle deposit bill that would help reduce the amount of plastic in the wild as a stormwater problem. I heard that that bill is not going to be reintroduced in 2022. Do you have any knowledge of that bill and its status?
Sure. I mean, first of all, let me just say on the last question, I was really deferring to Vice Chair Carr on that because he's been so involved in the issue. So I don't mean to brush it off by being silent on it. I just wanted to give Al a chance if he wanted to say anything on it. Yeah, single-use plastics, including the bottle deposit bill, obviously pretty significant issues right now. The bottle deposit legislation has been around for a long time. That was really a movement that crept up nationally in the 80s. And a delegate named Brian Frosch had that legislation in the General Assembly back then. And it's been around in various iterations since that time, including recently my seatmate, Delegate Love, had a version of the bill. And there hasn't been the support for it, partly, I think, related to the complications involved with our curbside recycling programs in the state and some other things under the Maryland Recycling Act. There's a lot of other efforts around single-use plastics, including seeing if we can replicate a policy in Maine where there's sort of a producer pays policy to help mitigate some of the impacts of single-use plastics. We've also had various pieces of legislation to try to reduce the distribution of single-use plastics, but it's a difficult battle. I mean, I'll just tell you, my family and I picked up McDonald's drive-through the other day, which my kids, who you saw earlier, really enjoy. And we thought, great, they're using paper straws now. That's great. Plastic straws are a big problem and create a lot of unnecessary waste. Well, here's what's funny. They switched to paper straws, but they switched from paper cups to plastic cups at the same time. So it's a really difficult battle. And I do think requires some legislative solutions, but the bottle deposit bill is one that really has been tried in this state for almost 35 years and just has not sort of connected well with our Maryland Recycling Act for whatever reason.
Thank you. The second question I wanted to ask both of you is what's the General Assembly's approach to affordable housing? It's a key issue here in Montgomery County as we discussed the 30-year general plan. Is there things that the state can do to finance, incentivize intentionally affordable housing in places like Montgomery County?
I'll mention one thing briefly and then turn it over to my colleagues. But, we do have the Rental Housing Works program, which is state dollars that usually assist local and sometimes private dollars in building affordable housing projects. And that's one of the areas people have talked about as a potential good use of some of these temporary budget surplus funds as sort of 1 or 2 time uses. So I think you'll see a push around that. And it's not directly applicable to your question, but I will just mention, we passed a lot of legislation last session on renter protections and ensuring our renters have adequate protections from the few landlords or the number of landlords who are not maybe as scrupulous as others. But one thing that we didn't get done was funding this access to counsel legislation. So we passed this access to counsel program to allow renters of a certain income level to access counsel in eviction proceedings, but we weren't able to fund it. And so that's another sort of piece of unfinished business that that funding is being sort of searched for. You can't really have access to counsel if there's just a program, but no money to pay for the program. So that's an ongoing issue as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chair Kramer or Vice Chair Carr.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is there is discussion about trying to utilize, again, some of those federal funds that we are receiving. Generally speaking, there is not a lot coming out of the state in the way of resources for affordable housing. That is generally an issue that is dealt with at the local level as to how best resources are utilized, and the zoning aspects of encouraging affordable housing and programs are typically done at the local level. But yes, putting some of the, if it can be done, then that is a meritorious use of those federal funds that we'd be getting for, and again, targeting them for capital projects would make sense.
Thank you, Senator Ira, and then Carla. Ira?
Hi, I wanted to ask about the bike lane situation. In Kent Mill, we recently had a problem of bike lanes being put in without community consultation, and the state transportation secretary was supposed to come back and have a community meeting in January this month. We haven't heard from him. Anyway, so I wanted to talk to our state reps a little bit about that. And thank you, Ben, for District 19 helping us out.
Yeah, and I'm probably more familiar with the issue than my colleagues. Maybe they are. For those of you who are not familiar with it, the State Highway Administration, in conjunction with the county, closed off a lane on University Boulevard, beginning at the southern end at Arcola Avenue, and at the northern end, it's Ira, what's the street where it terminates? Amherst, thank you. At the northern end, or I guess maybe that's considered the western end, and there was little, if any at all, discussion with the local communities about doing it. Was a pilot program, and there was very little, if any, discussion at all with the local communities about setting up the program, how it was going to operate, what the intentions are, and and the plans for it. And I think one of the biggest concerns, well, I think the biggest concern was there was no outreach to the community. For the communities, I think one of the biggest problems is that there is a free right turn from Arcola Avenue to this westbound University Boulevard direction, and that was closed off for the bike lane. And it inconvenienced a whole lot of people, created a backup on Arcola Avenue, and really disrupted the traffic patterns there. And there was a lot of concern expressed from the area communities about the whole issue. The state terminated the pilot in December, and have taken down the pylons that they had installed, closing off the lane. They have indicated that they are now going to do far better community outreach to discuss what it is they learned from the pilot project, and going forward, how best maybe we could adapt to increase the use of bicycles at bicycle lanes. And again, I think a big part of this is that it not be a bicycle lane to nowhere. The thought is if it starts to tie in to other bike lanes and bike ways, that we start creating a system-wide approach to this, then, you know, we need to focus on that. But the community needed to be heard and they were not. And that's the gist of this issue.
Yeah.
Ira brought
Yeah,
up.
let me just say a couple things about it. Everything you say is true. There was very little, if any, community involvement, community contact. Let me just mention a couple other issues. The problem is everybody, well, most everybody is for bike lanes, including me. And there should be much more movement towards bike lanes in the county. And I'm disappointed that Montgomery County doesn't have more bike lanes, but they have to be done properly. There was just a massive mismanagement in terms of the state here, and with a lot of virtue signaling showing, yeah, we're for bike lanes, for bike lanes. But the fact is, it cut off this right turn lane, which was the basic exit from the community into the county. It cut off that lane for 6 months. Then the lanes themselves, there are actually 2 lanes on University Boulevard in both directions. The lanes themselves were ostensibly unsafe. They had no barrier in a fast moving street between, other than these thin plastic poles. We had a traffic engineer from the neighborhood, very experienced, who had actually one of the designers of Arcola Avenue, the redesign a few years ago. And he's told them, look, these are unsafe. You can put in portable barriers that would safely protect the bikers. It was ignored. It was also suggested that they just move that right turn. They move the bike lane down away from the right turn lane, not to antagonize the community. That was also ignored. And then apparently they have been responsive, as you know, Ben, to letter writing campaigns, which we didn't even know about by the bike advocates. And then when we responded, then they said, okay, well, we'll bring down the lane. So they were responding to immediate pressures rather than a well-planned execution of these bike lanes. And that's what concerns me in the future about future bike lane projects in Montgomery County. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Ira. Carla? You're muted, Carla.
Just a little on the bike lanes because it was brought up, but then I want to say something about Thrive. I've done a lot of bike riding. I've ridden to Mount Vernon, and I routinely ride up to like Needwood and ride around the lake there and stuff. I'm all for bikes, but the bike lanes they're putting in Montgomery County are death traps. They do need a comprehensive plan, and they also need to provide a place for people to put their bikes. In Silver Spring, I used to work at NOAA. There were about 20 bike lockers there, and they were all rented for life. So I had no place to put my bike, so there was no way that I could ride it to work. So I agree there needs to be a comprehensive plan for this. And really, realistically, you can't retrofit bike lanes. That's just not the way to do it. And it's a problem because they don't want to do any more roads, which may be the right thing. But retrofitting them is not ever going to work. Now on Thrive, people mentioned affordable housing a few moments ago, and that certain kinds of things need to be done at the local level. And I was just thinking about Thrive, and I don't know if everybody realizes there's a tsunami coming towards us. And it's not just that we're not building affordable housing, it's that we're actively destroying it. The way Thrive is written, it is a gold mine for developers to tear down affordable homes, and they're initially aiming at affordable, diverse, racially and ethnically occupied neighborhoods. And we're getting practically daily offers, and the people who want to buy our homes are developer conglomerates, and they fall into two groups. I mean, some just want to quickly tear down our homes and build what I've started calling McMultis, because they're like McMansions, and that they're going to end up being plus $1 million structures, which is what developers want to be able to build. But as everyone involved, including the proponents of Thrive, have admitted, those won't be affordable. Not only that, the apartments in them will be too small for families. So if they think this is how they're going to fix past racism, you know, they might be surprised to find that not all formerly minority groups are going to be happy to live in tiny apartments and try to raise their children there, especially if the developers are free to tear down all of the ground cover and pave over the backyard, as is shown in some of the planning department slides, and you know, not provide any street parking and not provide any infrastructure to deal with the increased wastewater. I mean, what Thrive does, it's got its three major goals about equity and the environment, and they characterize the third one in different ways, but actually it doesn't do anything to further those goals. And the only thing that it will do immediately is allow these ZTAs that will allow the destruction of affordable homes. You have that on the one hand, and then you have a national trend. They advertise on TV all the time. You can't watch television and not see the ads for people who are bragging how easy it will be to sell your home to them. But of course, they all, just like the letters we get, they all want to buy at the bottom rate. They want to buy, what do you call it, with no conditions, as is. Well, they're not going to give you your home's real value. And what they do, I mean, even the Post, which is totally pro-developer, had a big story on it about a week ago, is they turn those homes, if they keep the homes, that's the other thing that can happen, they turn them into rentals. So we're driving America toward a future where all working class people only have the option of renting. They do not have the American dream of taking on debt and paying for years and providing for yourself when you're older through building equity in your home, because of course renters don't get any equity and their rent goes up perpetually. I mean, that's the tsunami that's heading for us. And I can't solve the country's problems, but I really think Montgomery County should be coming up with something a lot more realistic to deal with these issues than Thrive, which is a complete and total failure. And you've all been talking about ethics, which is a big part of this problem. And, you know, you have to wonder why the county, why the Fed committee, why the planning board.
Carla, we'd like to focus on the state legislation rather than the county.
Well,
Thrive.
on the ethics of it, you can do something. We need to pull these developers out into the light. And these ethics ideas that you've been discussing are a way to do it. Hopefully, we're not going to just say, well, it's really hard, so we can't do it.
Carla, there should be a question there. Let me ask another question. This is for Delegate Korman. Marc, can you give us an update on where the purple line situation stands right now? When can people along the alignment expect to see a new contractor and some of the heavy lifting being done?
Sure. Let me say a few things about it. First of all, I mean, as you all know, the Purple Line, east-west light rail connection has been under construction for quite a while. And that construction is very disruptive. Whatever you think of the project, and I suspect there's differing views on this call, I'll just say I'm a supporter of it. I want more suburb-to-suburb transit connections, but I know not everyone agrees with me. But there's no question it's been a difficult contractual process. And there's also a lot of impacts on a lot of the businesses that are along the Purple Line corridor, businesses that will do very well when the Purple Line opens, but right now their parking lot is a construction zone, and it's hard to get in and out of the building. And so for the past few years, the Montgomery County delegation advocated for some targeted business impact funding for those businesses. And finally, the governor agreed during budget negotiations last year to put 1 year of money in for that. He did not agree to future years of funding. And as a result of some strange nuances with legislation, this next budget that he'll be introducing next week does not have to have any funding for that program, even though obviously the disruption of the construction continues. So I say all that just to note that one of the major goals of the Montgomery County delegation, at least on the Health side, during this upcoming legislative session, is to continue that funding for the affected businesses along the Purple Line corridor. The construction contractor walked away about 1.5 years ago. The state at that time decided not to end the public-private partnership. They decided to continue the public-private partnership with the Purple Line Transit Partners. They stepped in to do some of the construction work during the interim as the Purple Line Transit Partners entity, and the state searched for a new construction partner. They announced in December that the construction partner has been identified. You know, it's one of these, they have these names of entities that are made for these contractual vehicles. So I actually don't remember the name, but it's made up of 2 different major construction companies. And they expect to go to the Board of Public Works to get approval for that. I believe it's the next meeting, so later in January. I have not heard if that's slipped. And I know because I've asked them at public hearings before, I've always insisted that the Purple Line Transit Partners come to the Maryland Transit Administration budget hearings that I've chaired, that they have a plan in place to sort of shift from the state doing some of the work to the construction partner picking it back up, but it's still going to take a few months for that to phase in. And I know it's very frustrating that instead of a light rail line going through Montgomery and Prince George's County, we have sort of a jagged scar, and I know we need to get that thing safely completed as promptly as possible. They expect that change you're talking about, Alan, to sort of begin in January, later this month, when the new construction partner is approved by the Board of Public Works.
Thank you very much, Delegate. Any final remarks for the group, Senator Kramer or Delegate Carr? Ben?
No, I just want to again say thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. Very much appreciate the interaction, and again, appreciate the good work that the Civic Fed has always done and continues to do. You know, without those of you who are here making it happen, we don't get this input. We don't hear from the community this way. So I wish all of you the very best for a happy and God willing, very healthy year to come. So my best wishes, and don't hesitate to be in touch if you find there is an issue that's a concern that you think is appropriately addressed by your legislature. So stay well.
So thank you, Senator Kramer, Delegates Korman and Carr, for the good work that you've done, and please reach out to us if we can be helpful in any way. Carrie, we're going to conclude this decision and this discussion and thank our groups. If you've got something else, we'll talk about it under committee business. So thank you all for joining us this evening, and we look forward to hearing from you next time.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, thank you for participating in that discussion. Was hoping we'd have a few more questions from our group, but I think we had a good conversation. Carrie, what did you want to ask a question about?
Well, it was more a statement than a question. We were talking about affordable housing here in Montgomery County, and as Carla has pointed out, Thrive's not going to do it. The entire premise of upzoning essentially increases the value of real estate once you implement it, especially the way we are through a Euclidean zone. We're not going to be able to solve this without the state's help. I honestly believe that, and I'm speaking for me because I have not run this by any group at this point. I believe the community land trusts are the solution, and I feel that if the state had someone that would spearhead a CLT program through overlay zoning, we could, in fact, create affordable housing in perpetuity that through a community land trust. And I wanted to hear what Mr. Kramer would have. I mean, he owns a development company. He knows a lot about development, and I think he would probably be valuable to the discussion. I think that if we can create some multiplex housing for the purposes of creating community land trusts, and if the state could find their way to provide the resources for that, at least to get it started, I think we could do something in Montgomery County. But as Carla said, the path that we're heading to, right now, I think it'll be the end of affordable housing, and clearly the end of naturally occurring affordable housing if we continue down this path. That's what I was going to say.
Okay, well, we have an opportunity to discuss that during our committee reports. And since our committees are fairly disorganized these days, I'm going to go down the list. If anybody has anything they'd like to mention about these topics, we would appreciate it. The first one is education. Does anybody have a report on education? Anything they can offer to the group? I would just make the observation that it looks very chaotic in Montgomery County Public Schools these days, where they don't have enough teachers, they don't have enough bus drivers, they don't have enough substitutes, and the transmission rates of the Omicron virus seem to be very, very high. The interim superintendent last night had to make an apology to the community about the lack of communication with the parents of people in MCPS schools. Anybody else have anything on education? Carrie?
Yeah, one thing, I have it under from a very reliable source that some schools are actually not reporting, COVID-19 cases. And the reason for that is they don't want to reach that 5% level where they're going to have to shut down or do whatever. This person was telling me that their principal had literally, because the parents of a student that was positive couldn't pick up their children, he just sent the kids back to class, and then didn't want to report that child had COVID until the teacher told him, hey, you've got to do this, otherwise we're in trouble. So this is leaving me with some real eerie feeling. I mean, you're right. Our schools are in chaos at the moment.
And as Chris Reynolds just pointed out, the 5% threshold is no longer a thing because it wasn't approved by the State Department of Education. Bailey Condry, you have a comment?
Yes, there's an upcoming Board of Education meeting, I think within the next week or 10 days. People are looking to sign up to testify. I don't have any other information on it than that. I apologize.
And apparently hundreds of people attended the Tom Hucker emergency town hall yesterday afternoon. I saw it was covered by WRC and WUSA. So that's a good thing.
Because of the Omicron?
Just people commenting on the chaos in MCPS, the lack of communications, the kids are being stuck at bus stops, not enough teachers, so they're putting a lot of kids in big rooms in the cafeteria because there's no teachers to supervise them in smaller groups. So it's a bad situation. Well, thank you for the comments on education. Next issue is environment. Who wants to weigh in on any environment issues that are facing the community? Sheldon, if you're there, is there a bill on the artificial turf issue and the chain of custody for the discarded materials?
Yes, there is. It's HB 131, and I put the link to it in the chat. And it's a very interesting political ramifications for it, because one of the issues that's always been problematic with anything having to do with trying to get people to use grass fields instead of the special interest that wants synthetic turf fields is that we now have the Montgomery County Parks and Planning Commission and the Prince George's Parks and Planning Commission, and even the special interests are all on the same wavelength and supporting this bill. So it's a it has a good chance of getting through this year. It's very exciting. Delegate Lamont has done a terrific job of designing it.
Sheldon, do you know why they're suddenly behind it?
Well, because they have, in part, they're behind it because they have been saying for 20 years that the fields could be recycled and you should, be responsible. And now we're just calling them on it. So it's kind of hard to say. And it's been structured to take the most controversial parts of things have been taken out. So it's just doing a chain of custody. Those of us who think that the goal here is grass fields instead of synthetic turf fields, it's not banning synthetic turf fields. It's just getting chain of custody, which which is a significant benefit. It won't be that you can't just dump these fields now into the Chesapeake Bay or put them in the woods someplace or things like that. So it's going to do some good things in terms of the disposal of them, and it's a step in the right direction. But it's not. It's a step in the right direction. It's not solving the problem.
Sheldon, real quick question for the notes. What does it mean by saying chain of custody?
It means that there are two parts to it. Is that when there's a new synthetic turf field, the producer who sells you the field is responsible for tracking where that field goes until it is safely disposed or safely recycled. And for an existing field, the owner of the field, which in this case is it's often a public entity like MCPS would be the owner. The current owner of the field is responsible for the chain of custody of where the field, tracking where the field is and reporting where the field is to the Maryland Department of Environment, MDE.
Thanks, Sheldon. Peggy?
Yes, Sheldon, thank you for bringing that up. I've been focused on local and bi-county bills, but that's a bill that I would like very much for the Civic Federation to support. Another bill with environmental protection in mind is MC 25-22, put in by Delegate Fraser Hidalgo. It would expand hunting for white-tailed deer, and I'm not sure if this is just in the suburbs. I hope it is. Bow and arrow hunting to most Sundays from sunrise to 10:30 a.m. I would love bow and arrow hunters to be able to hunt all day on Sunday because so many of them, that's their only day to hunt. But having morning hunting is certainly an improvement over having very little hunting on Sundays in general. So that's another one I would like with environmental consequences for the Civic Federation to support.
So Margaret, just to chime in on that one real quick, Sunday hunting is only not allowed on public lands. Maryland confines it to private lands, but Sunday hunting is allowed, but on private land only.
Okay.
So expand that to public lands and you'll have a whole lot of hunters loving you.
Josh, you'll have to tell us someday how you know about that.
I am an avid hunter.
Clue me in, Josh.
We've been fighting that battle for a lot of years.
Yeah, so deer hunting is sort of a leitmotif of the Civic Fed over the last 10 years. Thank you for the comments on the environment. Our next, alphabetically, I guess we would be on land use and planning. So weigh in. Anybody have any comments? I see that Ed from the Taxpayer League was here, and I was going to ask him for an update and any feedback that he's got on any work that the Taxpayer League has done. Ed, are you still on the call? I guess not. It was good to have him for a second.
So do you mind if I jump in with one last environmental issue?
Not at all.
So the Climate Action Coalition, the Climate Action Plan, the Climate Mobilization Montgomery County Climate Action Plan group has been asking the Civic Fed for a while to weigh in on letters that they write, public policy pieces that they draft. And as of this date, we have yet to ask the delegates from the different communities what they think about this idea. So in the upcoming newsletter, I will write an article about that so we can introduce it fully. So you get the pros and cons. I don't think there are many cons, other than it would mean we'd have to be pretty nimble in our turnaround on things. But I will write a letter in the next Civic Federation News to lay out what I and perhaps the organization can do about being more participatory in their efforts.
Okay, newsletter articles. We love newsletter articles. If anybody else wants to write a newsletter article, we love newsletter articles. And we need to get them by the 26th of the month for the next month's newsletter. So please write articles. Anybody else want to comment on land use and planning issues?
Yes.
I thought it was very interesting that there was so little responsiveness to the possibility that the state might be able to have an influence on these issues. I think that, as Carrie said, they could have a strong role. The state delegates from District 20 have expressed concern about the councils passing the business investment district legislation for downtown Silver Spring, which is the only area in the entire county that this kind of solution has been imposed. And the Delegate 20 representatives have said they will try to introduce state legislation to change it. I think they could help tip the balance, and I think they could be part of a solution, as Carrie said, involving how to have some more creative solutions to address the real housing needs, which are going to be the majority of residents, current and future, who have very low incomes and need affordable housing, and that this plan does nothing to help. So this is a huge problem-solving challenge that I would suggest not only the county, but the state and the federal government could work together on, but that's going to take some real imaginative leadership.
And then there's a real lack of imagination.
Yeah, there is. They're just settling on a solution that is not a solution. And Carla's right. I mean, she's absolutely right about the problem. The issue is what can we suggest for solutions, even though it shouldn't be our job. But the amount of work and excellent work that citizens have put in on this is just really impressive. And there is a group of people, mostly in Chevy Chase, who came out with a complete analysis of Thrive, line by line, and went through and highlighted what could be improved. And this was not to say this is not good, it's to say this is what needs to be improved before we think about passing this. But this is a massive change. And in the beginning of it, on page 6, it just basically says, this under the guidance of this new document, essentially all master and sector plans can be eliminated. And that is a game change that is astonishing. And as Carla says, and as Carrie says, everybody needs to take note. This is not a tweak. This is not a small thing. This is a revolution that actually didn't need to happen. And everybody needs to be aware, because everyone will be affected.
Thank you, Liz. Carla, for a short comment, please, and then Peggy. You're muted, Carla.
I tried to unmute myself.
You're okay.
I'm not competent. I understand why, there are 24 counties in Maryland, and it's not likely that we could jump through all the hoops to pass overarching education laws that are going to deal with zoning, because the different counties have different situations. I get that. But there is a statewide problem with developers having far too much behind the scenes influence. And they're getting away with it because of, among other things, lax enforcement of ethics rules. So while I don't know about statewide, zoning legislation, I really think there is something to do at the state level about ethics. And I appreciate the efforts people have made, but it's not a case that I think they can escape by explaining how hard it is to do. It's really fundamental to our government.
Thank you, Carl. Carrie?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to second everything that Elizabeth Joyce just said, because she's absolutely correct. And then to take it a step further.
Okay, Peggy.
There was an article today, actually it was put out yesterday by Seventh State. It deals with the planning board not adhering to their ethics standards and their rules and the law for the past 10 years, dealing with lobbyists. I believe that's had a great deal to do with the Attainable Housing Initiative and the Thrive Montgomery. I'd like to make a motion, if I may, Alan, that the Civic Federation send a letter to our president of the county council requesting them to cease any work on Thrive and attainable housing until they resolve and come to some conclusion the issues related to that ethical violation that occurred. We don't know what influence that has had on Thrive or the Attainable Housing Initiative. What we do know is that our county is divided right now, with the majority of the public not supporting, not aware, and not comfortable with what's being done with Thrive and the attainable housing. And I think that they should stop, get that resolved. And then really, I think that the next council should be the council that addresses it. And that would be my motion. Cease and desist till they address the findings in their ethics a report from their own council, general counsel, and allow Thrive to be decided upon on the next county council. And one more thing, as an aside, the Federation did a great job on the bus rapid transit small working group, and they developed a report. The Federation might consider, conducting a similar report on how we can create affordable housing in Montgomery County, realistically, practically, and not disrupting the entire county in the process. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, that was a lot. That was a lot to digest, Carrie. I wish you had given us a heads up about that. Frankly, I don't want to have that conversation, but if you moved it, Carrie's moved that
a motion just to request that the council cease and desist work on Thrive and the attainable housing until they address their the planning board's own general counsel report on ethics and its relationship to Thrive.
So Carrie has moved. You heard him. He moved this proposal that the Civic Fed write a letter to the county council about the 7th State article and about the ethics and cease and desist. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second that.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, if you don't want to do it.
Okay, so it's been first and seconded. Is there a conversation about this? Anybody have anything to say about this? We don't have any language.
Why don't we, it's very late. Why don't we all read it? It's very important because it's their own general counsel of the Maryland Park and Planning. It's a big deal, but we need to think about what we want to say and how. And so why don't we table it and vote and discuss it next
rather
month?
than table it, may I suggest that I yield to the best wording from the executive board so that the executive board may
come up with language that they feel is appropriate with respect to, the findings of the general counsel. Would that be acceptable?
Your suggestion is that the executive committee meeting a week and a half from now should try to put together a draft letter on this proposal that you're saying, right?
Carrie,
Absolutely. Yeah, fine.
okay, then, any more discussion on this? Then all those in favor of our executive committee drafting a letter along the lines Carrie suggested, please.
Excuse me, I have my hand raised.
Okay, please go ahead.
This, really what we want is a report that outlines the lobbyists who have been visiting with staff and members of the planning board in the last decade, and particularly through the development of Thrive. And instead of saying we don't want Thrive to go forward, perhaps the best way to do it is to say that this is quite shocking because so much of the elements of Thrive and what appears to be the attainable housing strategies, which is not now before the county council, benefit developers, that perhaps the county council should demand a report before they finish their deliberate Thrive, rather than say stop doing Thrive, which just sounds like we're using it as a smokescreen, but try and get to the heart of who's been visiting with staff and the planning board members who are lobbyists, and demand a report.
I'd like to respond to that.
No, Carrie, you wait, remain from Cloverly.
And then the other question is, if the Federation has to go back to all its members before it could write a letter like that, it would seem to me.
This is quite a reminder from Cloverly. I just want to say that I think one evidence of this is the fact that all the projects that have been approved, and there's been 24 planning areas that have been changes since that Reamer admitted we shouldn't be upset about Thrive because Thrive's been used for 24 planning projects in the county and 24 master plans. So just look at the projects that have been built. And I can't say that any of the projects that have been built have been a fantastic success. Even Rose and Pike and Rose. People hate it that I know of. So, and Montrose Parkway, it's not a parkway anymore. It could be lined with high-rise buildings entirely. There's no parkway there. All these things that we were sold from 2000 to 2010, they've all been trashed with development. I don't know. There's certainly the elements there, and I've worked a lot with park and planning, and they use every dirty trick in the book to defeat citizens and shut our voices down. So I would like, personally, I didn't bring this up, but I would like the state to investigate how these agencies like park and planning get away with what they're doing. And we don't have millions of dollars to throw at lawsuits. Cloverly has laid out $30,000 to fight one particular project. And it goes on and on and on through the courts. You get an honest judge, you get a dishonest judge. It's a lost deal, boy. And all it takes is somebody like the state saying, well, the planning board has to be supervised. There's somebody we have to go to beyond the planning board, except the courts, to make sure that things are being done honestly in the planning board. I can point case after case just in our area where the circumstances are the same, but the outcomes are completely different because of how it affects the developers. So it's ridiculous. It's not being run by
Joe Awkward. Joe? Joe, your hand is up. You want to say something?
Maybe he left.
Jerry Garson?
The real thing is we probably should forward a letter to the state attorney general, Brian Frosch, on this and have him investigate it. Because this definitely looks like it's in violation of state law what Park and Planning is doing. And we probably should write a formal letter to Brian Frosch asking him to investigate, because he's the only one who has authority, it seems, to investigate this.
Thanks, Jerry. Amy Henchy?
I was going to concur with a suggestion that somebody made, and it went by so quickly that I don't know for sure who it was, that we table this until we have a chance to, it's something I feel that I would need to discuss with other members, other delegates, and the management of my association before I took a position on behalf of the Northwood side.
I think that was the idea, was that the executive committee would try to put something together and that could then go out to people, out to the associations.
I think that's where we are. Carrie, do you have a problem with that?
No, not at all. I did want to say that the general counsel also pointed out that lobbyists, the range of lobbyists is very extensive. Many special interest groups, nonprofits, they're also considered lobbyists. So when you have, like a housing partnership that is a nonprofit organization, they are lobbyists, whether you realize it or not, and they're not registered, and they do lobby our planning staff for legislation and projects. So I fully have confidence in the executive board. I think y'all can do a fine job.
But we can't issue the letter until it gets a little feedback from the membership. So maybe
Right.
put an article in the newsletter outlining what we propose for this letter and we can make it gritty for the newsletter so that people understand we're a little fed up. And then we get feedback at the next meeting and issue it. But that's another 6 weeks.
I don't know if we have the time to do this.
I don't think we have the time.
Okay.
I think Jerry's absolutely right. We have a wonderful, excellent ethical attorney general. There's no problem. I don't think we don't even have to take a position on what the general counsel of the Maryland Park and Planning Board said, to say, we've noticed that this has been issued. Could you please, Attorney General Frosch, investigate this? And then we have raised it to an authority that might well do something about it without having to get everybody in the county on board. Because as we all are realizing, most people still don't have a clue what's going on, and only people who have been paying attention to this do. But if we say, please, Mr. Frosch, would you please investigate this? This is from, it's so great because it's from their own general counsel. Then we're not the bad guys, but we're saying this has come up and it affects our entire county, and could you please look into it?
That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
A really good idea. By the way, lobbyists are people who are paid to represent a client. There's a legal definition of lobbyists, which doesn't include nonprofits.
There is, and a lot of them are still not registered, and there's a lot of shenanigans going on with supposed 501c3s that actually are lobbying and they're not supposed to. And the prime example of that is the Coalition for Smarter Growth, and they get away with it because their parent organization is a 501c3. It's technically legal, but it stinks, and they have been the most important agent in all this stuff. But if we just say, listen, here we go, Mr. Frosch, please look into this, and then who could not agree with that?
The article appeared in 7th State. Is that where it was?
Yes.
Yeah. Carol Ann, do you have a question? Did you have a comment? Still muted, Carol Ann.
I just wanted to say that, yeah, I think Jerry has hit on the best path here. And I do think that that's a very appropriate step. And we can always still provide more information on this issue if someone does an article for the newsletter. But I think a letter is asking for that, for him to look into it, is just makes perfect sense to me.
And we're just passing along the message from the office of, from the general counsel of their own agency. And that is just a perfect solution.
So there seems to be consensus that the executive committee would draft a letter that we would address to the state attorney general that would basically highlight what?
The findings of the general counsel of the Maryland Park and Planning.
Bailey, you're
Board.
shaking your head. Why are you shaking your head?
I thought we had gone past that already.
No, we're still forming consensus here because we don't want to step on any toes. But I think this is a clear path without offending anyone and without stepping outside of our mandate.
What was your issue, Bailey?
I just thought that the article already exists. I thought that we were just going to be a conduit for distributing the article to various people and asking them what they think about it. And don't you agree it needs some type of action?
No,
Let's
what
forwarding
we're
the
saying,
entire article with the backup material to the state attorney general and asking him to investigate it.
right, that way we don't have to take a position on stuff that we're not even informed enough to take a position on. We just want him to look into it and he's got the authority.
As it relates to Thrive, though, bear in mind, the planning board has the ability to resolve their own ethical conflicts. So what we're saying is, this has occurred. This has occurred, and it needs to be reconciled with what the council will be voting on. Brian Foss should be able to look into it. It amounts to semi-corruption, in my opinion.
Jared, you have another
As
question?
Ellen reminded me, we're talking state action right here. Thrive would be a component, but it's not the only one. I like Elizabeth's suggestion too, but I don't have any, role here.
Well,
I
we
would
could
suggest
then-
we could CC all of the council members and the planning board.
I love
Just so
it.
just so we're not doing this behind their back.
Absolutely. We would not want to be dishonest and circumspect the way some agencies represent. That's perfect too. I think we have a really good solution here.
What is it, Liz?
And we're totally transparent.
What is it,
Yes.
Liz?
The solution, my view, summarized from what we've said, we will have the executive committee draft a letter citing the findings of the legal counsel for the Maryland Park and Planning Board and ask him to investigate. And then depending on what he does, there are two steps here, depending on what he comes out with. And we'll let everybody know what the executive committee has done, what it has asked for. And then we will hope he moves quickly, which he probably will because he's stepping down at the end of the year. And we don't know how Thrive is going to go. We don't know if this is going to be able to affect Thrive, but it will affect the operations of this planning board, which many of us are pretty sure is not totally on the up and up. But we don't have the evidence. That's not our role, but the Attorney General can get the evidence.
So is everybody, Carrie, you're going to withdraw your motion about the cease and desist?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I'm going with what Liz said. That's fine.
And what Liz has said is that the executive committee would draft a letter to the Attorney General, CC'd everybody, that would highlight our concerns about the issues raised in the 7th, 8th article coming from the observations by the General Counsel of MNC PPC.
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Moving on. Anybody else have anything else they want to say about land use and planning?
Are we going to vote on that or not?
No, we're not going to vote on that. There's no motion. There's no motion on the table. It's been withdrawn. We've got a consensus.
Well, don't we have a new motion on the consensus or?
Go ahead and take a vote on that motion now, on the consensus as a motion.
It's been-
Sending the letter.
Excuse me?
A motion, I move that we send a letter
Is there a
sending
second?
this out to
Second,
the,
It's been first and
Attorney
seconded that
General.
we send a letter that's been described by Liz Joyce and myself.
right,
That would focus on the key points of the seventh state article and the conclusions of the GC of the MNC PPC to the Attorney General and CC to everybody.
With
Yeah.
full copies of the Inspector General, General Counsel report.
sure.
Sure. All those in
And we-
favor say aye.
I,
Aye.
I,
Anybody opposed? Abstentions?
unanimous.
Abstentions? Okay. Amy Henchy, did you abstain?
I did not. I voted aye, Alan.
Okay, good. Okay, so Jim Zepp, do you have a question?
Well, actually, I had a comment here that I think the problem we're dealing with is that we have an independent agency that is out of control. And to that point, a few years ago, I was at a planning board meeting, and the issue was raised that they were going to do was violate state regulations. And the chair, Casey Anderson, grandly leaned back in his chair and said, "I don't care." You know, here he is, a lawyer violating state law or state regulations. And, you know, it's just this kind of attitude by this agency. So it's like, who is over park and planning?
is that,
you know,
is that exchange, I'm serious, is that exchange recorded? Was that on a video somewhere? Because that is the
Well,
kind of thing we
it
need
would
to
have been
have.
it would have been recorded, but it was like about 5 years ago, so it'd take a
Ugh.
lot of digging to get to it.
I'd love to see it.
So, but yeah, all their meetings are recorded. And I think they were even video recorded back that long. But it's just that is their attitude because they are an independent agency. They're not subject to review by election, by the council, anybody, and they know it. And that's why they've been on many different issues, like the Farm Road issue, have been public opinion, expression by public officials and whatnot. They don't care.
That is true.
Thanks, Jim.
Someone told me, oh, excuse me, go ahead.
Alan Myers, you have something to say?
Yeah, let me unmute you. Two things. First of all, I deal with a lot of nonprofits. You cannot claim to be a nonprofit because you have a parent organization that is a nonprofit. You have to be incorporated separately. Secondly, the so-called parent organization of the Coalition for Smarter Growth does not claim to be a parent organization. They say they provide funding for them. That's it. So there is no nexus that the coalition claims it has. But moving on to one other thing regarding the state, as part of this process on Thrive, there's a state organization that gets the copies of the county's master plans. And it gets them and they go into it, but there's no action taken. They don't approve it. They don't have any standards for approval. This is something that the legislature could work on, that this organization has some teeth to its process, that when these master plans, these countywide master plans are developed, that they include certain things and that they have to be recognized that they have fulfilled the responsibilities for developing such a plan.
Carrie Lamari, that issue came up before. It's not the master plans, it's the general plans by the jurisdictions.
Sorry, my fault. Yeah, I misspoke.
And they have to go before the Department of Planning for state of Maryland.
There's a problem with that, though. We are a charter county. The State Department of Planning isn't really an oversight to the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission because we're a bi-county agency, a charter county. I do agree that they should have more control, but all they can do is review a plan if, big word there, it's submitted for consideration. Now, Thrive was submitted, the staff draft was submitted. So therefore, when Marc Elrich requested they review the planning board draft, they had to review that as well. No, we definitely need more teeth. There's no question about it, but right now.
Thank
It's
you,
an
Carrie,
entire kingdom.
for that clarification. Jerry, your hand is up. Do you have another comment?
Yeah, this whole Thrive thing keeps, when you listen to the public hearings on them, everyone who says they're for it says they're for affordable housing. But when you actually read the plan, there's nothing in there requiring any affordable housing to be built. So this is something they've been trying to steamroll, calling, we need affordable housing. Yeah, everyone will tell you we need affordable housing, but there's absolutely no plan in Thrive to provide any affordable housing. If you live in Potomac and you sell your house here in Potomac and you want to buy a piece of one of these quadplexes, you'll discover you don't have enough money from the sale of your single-family detached homes to buy one of the 4 units in the quadplex. Another thing that we've just seen recently, we've seen 2 major fires in multifamily housing, one in Philadelphia and one in New York State.
Jerry, if you want to write something about that, please write something about it. I've got some notes here that we want to move on to some other
Well, let
topics.
me just finish. But what I'm saying is housing has become less affordable in the last 2 weeks than it was because everyone's going to now put various requirements into more fireproofing and multifamily housing.
Okay. Thank you for the conversation about land use and planning.
And don't forget the fire over on Piney Branch Road.
Right. Legislation. Peggy, you're still here. Do you would like to say anything about that?
Yeah, because our legislature only works for 3 months. And if we want to have any impact at all, we should be starting right now. And I'd like to bring up 6 or 7 bills that I'd like to get the Civic Federation to weigh in on in support of. One which won't have any relevance to most of our property owners, our homeowners. Delegate Carr brought it to my attention. It's MC 1-22, and I think it's a great case of equity and possible ethics. It would require owners of multifamily dwellings, 5 or more units, and particularly apartment buildings, to have a license. One of the requirements of the license would be that all of the broadband providers, I think there are 3 in Montgomery County, be allowed to sell contracts to the tenants of the various different units. This is important because at this point, a lot of the owners or managers of multifamily dwellings have arrangements or contracts allowing just one broadband provider to service the entire complex. Maybe some of these people are getting a little bit of a payback from the people that they choose to provide the broadband. But passing this bill would supposedly give more, it would allow for no exclusive contracts and provide more competition among the broadband providers for the tenants of these buildings. I think
Peggy,
yeah.
we're losing people quickly. So what I suggest is that you package it for the executive committee next Thursday, and that
we can look them all over at one time.
And then we put the information in the newsletter.
Fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Just checking. Carol Ann, you were here. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that we do need the Civic Fed push to get the penalty of perjury law. And one of the reasons we need that is not just from the opposition, but also our fellow delegates and senators have just not been interested in this or seeing the need for it in the 2 times that we've put it up before. So we really need folks to get out on this. It's PG/MC 10722. If you have any questions about it, shoot me.
Carol Ann, you would help us a lot by drafting a letter that we can send around to elected officials on that issue.
Well, it should be part of our legislation package.
Well, that's true, but I'm just saying that if we're giving special attention to under penalty of perjury, then she's the subject matter expert on this.
Thank you, Carol. I can use your help.
This is a bill that we proposed. right? This was a legislative initiative that we brought to Senator Kramer and said, please do this.
I'm
So
just
it's
saying that,
something we-
I'm just saying we need some help in the drafting and getting it done. So if you can
Yeah,
help us. we-
That's fine. But could I make one more plea is that one of the opponents to this has been Delegate Moon. So any of our friends from his district, if you have a good relationship with him, if you could please engage him on this.
Sure, I can do that.
A lot of folks just don't understand that there is lying and cheating going on.
Okay, that's the legislation piece. Public safety. I guess public finance alphabetically would come first. What can we say about public finance? We won't say very much about it tonight. We could say something about public safety, which is we've got a serious deteriorating public safety situation in parts of the county. And it doesn't look as if our elected officials have good solutions for dealing with that. Part of it has to do with how much we pay law enforcement. Part of it has to do with the fact that there's no affordable housing for first responders, teachers, people like that. There's no solution for that. There's supposed to be a tax credit legislation that's before the county council, but it doesn't mean that a police officer is going to be able to live here anytime soon. So we've had some very terrifying events in downtown Silver Spring over the course of the last 8 weeks, with gunfights, with stabbing, with armed carjackings. The list, unfortunately, is getting long, and it is quite dramatic, as well as an officer-involved shooting not a block away from where I'm sitting right now, early morning a couple of weeks ago. So we had the police chief on our meeting last month, and that was a very well-attended meeting. I'm not sure people got any satisfaction from what he said. They realize there's a problem. It's unclear what they're going to do to deal with it. Anything else in public safety? Transportation.
The WMATA has now gone to a Saturday schedule of buses because they don't have enough bus drivers because of the rapid increase in the COVID-19 Omicron variant. The Department of Transportation said that they had less people for doing the snow. They did a pretty good job on this last snowstorm because it was a fairly minor snowstorm. There wasn't that much depth of snow. And it's just, that's why I'm proposing that. The problem is that the school system will only clean school parking lots. They won't clean the roads to the school. And this is the whole problem when you have a Board of Education that is not responsible to anyone in the county and has no use for the county. And then they say, well, we couldn't open schools on Tuesday because we didn't have enough, the streets weren't clear.
Jerry, anything else? Jerry, anything else you want? You can write that up in the newsletter. Anything else you want to report on transportation?
Yeah, is proceeding, and WMATA is now claiming they'll reopen the Rockville and the Shady Grove station by January 15th.
Jim Zepp, did you want to comment on public safety issues?
As a matter of fact, yeah, because I have about 35 years of experience in the criminal justice field. And one of the things in law enforcement, there's a 20-year cycle to law enforcement personnel, starting basically in the 60s riots when agencies staffed up, hired a lot of people, and then they face the same problem every 20 years because in law enforcement, they have the 20-year and out retirement capability. And so you've had like, what was it? Massive retirements and leaving of officers every 20 years. And so it's a difficulty almost every law enforcement agency. The one thing usually though is that Montgomery County pays higher salaries than does the district. And so traditionally, it has been a thing where officers will jump the line from like the district into Montgomery County, get higher pay, almost like 10,000 a year bump in pay just by moving from the district to Montgomery County. And of course, except for recently, Montgomery County, you don't get shot at like you do in DC. So there are cycles and things going on in law enforcement, and that sometimes you just kind of have to roll with those cycles.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Joe Awkward, your hand is still up. Do you have any comment at all? Alan Myers?
Yeah, just as with Jerry, they're also Ride-On has reduced its service because of lack of drivers as well. Got that email today. And my old favorite thing, residential permit parking. I found out that if you have a temporary tag on your car, you cannot get a residential permit. The system will not accept it. I don't know what people are supposed to do when they get new cars, because you're sure going to get a ticket for having not having a permit.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me about that. Thank you. Okay, we've gone through our list of committees. Anybody have any parting thoughts? We're way over time at 10:03. Anybody want to share anything for the good of the order? Let me just make a couple. Are you raising your hand, Jerry?
Yes, I'm raising my hand. I just want to call to anyone's attention. We decided this morning to go over to Potomac Library to pick up a COVID-19 test. They were giving two packs to each person. That means if you had you and your wife going, you got 8 COVID testing things. The line was moving extremely fast. We were outside, I would say about 5 minutes. And the line just, you walked in, they handed you the 2 things, you walked right out. So if anyone needs any COVID-19 tests, I strongly recommend going to the libraries the next day or 2.
Thank you.
The White Oak Library had a line all the way around it, and the traffic was backed up to 29.
And
So I guess you had a different experience in Potomac.
Well,
and there was
Potomac worked better.
And there was no wait at all at the Silver Spring Library. People ran out in just minutes. So it does depend on where you are. Just
Potomac Library was a mess at 12 o'clock. I didn't even try to go there. I went to Davis.
Want to remind you that we try to keep up-to-date news on the Civic Fed Facebook page. Check that out for breaking news and articles from all over. We are looking for people to participate in our committees for nominations for new officers and in June, as well as awards. So if anybody wants to help with that, and we like newsletter articles, please send them to one of the officers or to the Civic Fed address. If there's nothing else.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion, that's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, you guys, thank you so
Aye.
much, and we'll see you next month.